Welcome back to another episode of Code to Cloud. I am joined today with my good friend, Bret Fisher. Bret, great to have you on the show. Do you just want to quickly introduce
Hello.
yourself?
Yeah, I'm Bret. I am graybeard, so 30 years in IT, mostly as an IT pro sysadmin and DevOps before it was DevOps. But the last 10 years, I have been kind of known for my obsession with Docker and everything containers. And I'm a Docker captain and cloud native ambassador with the CNCF, and I talk nonstop about everything you can do with containers. So I have courses. I do like this. I do a podcast, um, a live show every week on YouTube. We have constant guests from the cloud native community, and I am recently obsessed with agentic DevOps, which I'm sure we'll get into. So uh, that's been my life. I'm a full-time content creator for the last 5 years, I'd say, when I finally fired all my consulting clients. But yeah, I've done lots of things, been lots of roles for the long time, and now I'm just having fun making content, trying to make a job out of that.
That sounds absolutely amazing. And I can't wait to get onto the subject of agentic DevOps. Right, it's such a buzzword. But so let's talk a little bit about your background. I like to do this in the show. Your origin story, right? Like X-Men Origins, right, kind of thing. But you're a sysadmin, right? I'm sure you're going to take us all the way back, but I always like raise a toast for sysadmin day. I don't know about you, but that's an
Yeah,
official.
it's on my calendar.
It's on my calendar.
calendar.
I was a sysadmin once, right? So it was raise a toast to the folks out there fighting the good fight. But
Yeah,
do you want to
sysadmin day and Towel day and
Tao?
May the
What's that?
5th.
Which obviously May the 5th.
Towel day. That is from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and there's a national. I mean, you're UK. Come on, man.
My dad would be like, "You watched this as a kid. Why can't you remember this?" Right? But yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Those were weird and funny back. That you're talking about the live action British
But yeah,
take on it. But yeah, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. There's a national day where you literally just take your towel. So there's a line from the book, and is something like a good traveler knows where their towel is, or something like that. And so my friends and I, like, that are fans of the movie, fans of the books, fans of the show, like we literally walk around with our towels. Now I live 6 blocks off the ocean in Virginia Beach, Virginia. So walking around with a towel here is not as weird as it might be if you were like downtown London or New York or something.
New York,
but
right?
we literally walk around with towels. We take pictures and selfies, and we make fun of it. We have fun with it. So yeah, that's another national holiday for nerds, as there are many now.
So yeah, May the 5th obviously just happened, but like May the 6th or May the 6th, right, is another.
Yeah,
it's like they're trying to make it into a weekend now, right? Which
it is that. Well, yeah, because they've got the whole festival thing, and I just learned of that this year. I don't know how long the May the 6th, but I don't know how long that's been around, but that's a pretty cool one. Yeah,
lots of memes about Anakin Skywalker right around that time, but yeah, sounds epic.
I
But
do
yeah,
have friends that have built their own lightsabers, so yes, I am not that level. Although I do have a baby Grogu on my wall
I
over
see
there,
that there.
in the
Yes.
background. And I do have the stormtroopers. This is actually local art. If you're watching the video version of this, we're pointing around my studio. I have local art. We have an art show at the boardwalk here at the beach, and my wife for a year bought me. Basically, it's like Lego stormtroopers, but with a macro camera. So it's a giant glass poster on the wall that they look of 2 feet in size, but they're actually little Legos in a scene, like maybe on Hoth with anyway. Yeah. So yeah, of course I'm a Star Wars fan. I am Gen X, so I mean, you're required to be a Star Wars fan.
I agree. Empire Strikes Back is the best Star Wars film. I mean, I might start a debate here.
Yeah. And Andor is absolutely the best content we have seen in 20 years. So
I have not watched it yet. I believe the Imperial Navy scenes are supposed to be quite a watch, which I always a fan of, right? So
if I could I could just describe in a sentence Andor. So I have a niece that is uh she's a millennial, actually technically Gen Z by a year. Has not seen any Star Wars, but she says things like Chewbacca. Like she just said that the other day. I'm like, that's from Star Wars, and she had no idea, right? So like she knows the lexicon, but she doesn't understand that it's all connected to the same movies franchise. And I was trying to explain Randor to her, and I was saying, look, it has nothing to do with the Force. It is not.
Not
Basically an
Jedi's.
office drama
Yeah.
in the world of Star Wars. It is about how to take a democratic society to an authoritarian regime from office politics style stuff. And there's no lightsabers, there's no force, that was actually a rule of the show, was to not have magic. And they only break it for one very small scene in the second season. But it is a fantastic show. It's actually sadly over because it's only 2 seasons. But it's a pretty cool premise, and I'm a big fan of it. And everyone just won't shut up about it because it's a lot of Star Wars fans are saying it's the best content we've had in decades.
Sounds amazing. That sounds amazing. I I could literally talk to you about Star Wars for days, right? I am a I've been watching it, playing it, absorbing it for all my life, right? I'm a big
For
fan,
yeah, your whole life, right? Yeah,
right? My
yeah.
whole
And you
life.
got Starfield in the background, which I mean, you're clearly a fan of space dramas.
I
Like that's
am
a great game.
so
It's a great game.
algorithmically that game just hits all the notes for me. It's a bit like I've got like these bucket list items. One, I'd love to go to space one day. I'm wondering if Jeff would give me a free ticket. But then, but then I'd also like to
Get on the
deploy
list.
some. Yeah, get on the list, right? I'd also like to deploy some cloud infrastructure in space. Like I keep putting it in my like reviews at Microsoft. I'm like, hey, like, what
I
do you
bet
want to
you they
do?
have Docker. I bet you they got Docker in the International Space Station. I bet you there's
Well, I
something
mean, if
Docker
you
there.
wanted a highly available, stable platform, there is no other choice, right? And yeah, like I love all that. It's same with Cyberpunk. I don't know if you've ever played that, but
Oh yeah,
that's like
yeah.
Blade Runner, Terminator, The
My whole
Matrix.
vibe for years. My whole
Yeah,
vibe for years has been synthwave style.
exactly.
Like
80s
I
music,
actually,
right? Yeah,
yeah, 80s music. I have a new podcast coming out, Agentic DevOps. We're starting a whole new thing in addition to the original podcast, and the theme music had to be synthwave because it
amazing.
turns out AI is very much if for example, this is a tweet I put out. If you go to Canva, which is a design app for making thumbnails and graphics and stuff like that, it's like an average person's Photoshop. And if you just they have amazing templates. They have hundreds, if not thousands, of templates that you can use. And if you just search AI, almost every single template is only bright pinks, bright blues, and purples. Like that is almost exclusively the color palette, and maybe a silver in there, but that's exclusively the color palette of what we think of as AI or robots. And ironically, that's the same color palette of synthwave or 80s. If you don't know what a synthwave is, it's like 80s style electronic music. It has inspiration from the 80s and from Blade Runners and that kind of stuff. And it's my whole thing. So
I proper went into dad mode the other day. But just quickly on that, I'm in the bonus room and I'm on Amazon Prime and Miami Vice is on there. And I'm watching it in the intro, and my son just walks down the stairs and went, "You're so old." I went, "This is amazing. The music, the speedboats, the cars, like everything,
yeah, but
right?"
that
And he,
that
yeah,
theme music still bangs though. Like it's a banger. Like
it's an
theme,
absolute
that theme.
banger, absolute
I
banger,
bet
right?
you could play that song for like a teenager who's probably wearing a Led Zeppelin T-shirt now because they're cool again, and they would probably think that's an amazing song. It wasn't for 20 years after, but like I love the renaissance of 80s and 90s. I'm a
It's
big fan.
so I have like my dev playlists. I don't know about you. You know when you're preparing content or trying to do something, right? And I had the Miami Vice soundtrack on Apple Music playing while I was doing it. It's wild, right?
Yeah,
But yeah, I
that's good.
it's something like the originators of lo-fi, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, I do
yeah,
love a bit of wave. I can't wait to hear the new intro for the new podcast, by the way. But
yeah, yeah, yeah.
so could we talk about where it all started for you? Like, how did you get into tech? What happened there?
Yeah, well, not the usual way. Although I love that's actually probably 50% of people in tech is like not the usual way. I love hearing the mid-career stories and all that
Oh
stuff, like
yeah.
career changing careers in their 30s. I have some good friends that are like that. I started actually because I had a PC. I had a 286, and then maybe a 386, and before that, I even had a Sinclair, which made by a UK
I
famous
know it well. Yeah.
inventor um, named Sinclair, and the Sinclair was like this tiny little you could write basic language on it, and I had that in middle school. And the story I tell people is that it all started in fifth grade when my mom decided to buy my brother for his birthday, who's 2 weeks before my birthday, bought him a GI Joe aircraft carrier, and then bought me a Tandy color computer too.
Andy.
And
Oh,
and I had a Tandy, and I'd had the Sinclair before that, but the Tandy is where I learned how to write BASIC. Really, you were just copying out of books at the time because we didn't have the internet really. So the internet existed, but it was really just DARPA and universities back in the 80s. And I learned how to program, and I would just write all weekend. So everybody would be outside playing, and I would just write. It turns out I'm actually still not a great coder, but 40 years later. But in high school, I tested well, but didn't really have a lot of college opportunities. Nobody in my family had ever been in university. And so I went straight military because my dad had, and I sort of had that whole get a job or go in the military, but you can't stay here kind of speech. And so I joined the Navy, and the Navy, I volunteered for a program that would give me 2 years of vocational, where I basically learned PCs and mainframes and mini frames, and then went straight to the fleet. This is early 90s, and spent 6 years running and building infrastructure on ships. So my first 5 years of real like business tech was basically connecting ships up to the internet, learning how to implement firewalls, which were a brand new thing in the early 90s. Like, before the internet, you didn't need a firewall because you're landlocked. Your network is only inside the building or inside the data center. And so I had to learn TCP/IP from sitting in Barnes and Noble and reading the books. I think it was a TCP/IP Unleashed, and that book was so thick and so expensive. And I was only like an E4 at the time in the U.S. Navy, so I was basically just above poverty line. So I couldn't afford the book. So I remember just sitting in Barnes and Noble and reading books and NT 351 books and Novell NetWare books and HP Unix books and just constantly consuming content because that was the only way to learn, really. We didn't really have vocational stuff for continuous learning in the Navy. And I was lucky enough to be around when mainframes were starting to be on their way out. So I got to be part of replacing green screen dumb terminals with PCs that were running DOS, and then a few years later adding mice to them so that we could install, Windows 3.11, even before Windows 95. So I was around for the origin of the internet, and when we moved to TCP/IP as the universal protocol, and when we understood what Ethernet was, and that was, I understand half duplex versus full duplex. Like, I'm lucky enough, and I feel like this is like a lost art now. I'm lucky enough to have had those origins of the internet as a base core understanding of how this stuff works. And kids, that, as the sad part is that people coming into university today, everything's already built for them. The data centers exist, the networking exists. You ever see like a YouTube short or a TikTok of someone that's building an Ethernet cable for the first time in their 20s or 30s, and they're super excited that they learned how to make a cable. Well, I was around when that was the only option. You had to make your own cables because we didn't have prefab cables necessarily back then. And so that was my origin story. So I started as a lot of people used to in tech support. I was help desk in 95 to 2000, and then graduated to sysadmin and ran servers and was always the guy staying late after work, closing down the office. I wasn't necessarily early to the office. I'm a night owl, but I would always stay late, always working on side projects at the office, always asking the boss for like the next new thing. Was the first one to implement wireless with my team in the early 2000s because I ran tech at a local government, Virginia Beach local government. We were about 400,000 people, and we as a city, and we had 7,000 employees at the city. So I had a pretty big network, and so I ran the desktop server teams for a long time there, and got a lot of my early chops in terms of like enterprise scale computing, and we had everything from mainframes there to, PCs running Windows XP. When we were putting out XP before we had firewalls on the desktop, because that, if you remember back then, it was like Windows XP came out and then they patched it later with the Service Pack 2 that had a
That's
firewall on it.
right.
So
The big security memo,
yeah,
right? Yeah, yeah.
we didn't know we needed firewall. We didn't know that hackers were going to reach inside our networks pretty easily, or that you would just, back then you'd plug in your computer at home and it would be raw internet. There was no firewall. And so you would have problems. And there was all sorts of, we didn't have like common patching back then. I mean, it was a wild, wild west time. And I love having those memories, just because I still lean on that stuff today, right? Like if you see some of the best troubleshooters, the best operators, they're the people that can dig into the system, understand what's happening at the kernel, understand that like there's network drivers and what that means, and that things have to be broken into packets, and packets have sizes. And luckily we don't have to have spreadsheets of IP addresses anymore, but that, those were the things that I spent the first 10 or 15 years on. And so now everything actually feels harder, just because we have worked our way up the stack so much that, like, we have so many levels of abstraction now that you're expected to know, that I sympathize with the young people coming in, that they know like the top 3 levels of the stack, right? They know Kubernetes, they maybe know containers, and they maybe know the shell. And yet everything below that, they just know that DHCP is supposed to give them an IP address, and that DNS is how they access things. And they don't really understand these things. They don't understand, like, DNS on TCP versus UDP, and all sorts of stupid stuff that we all had to worry about 20 years ago. And that all that stuff kind of just works until it doesn't. And now we're all worried with these really high level problems of compilations and time, and Node.js frameworks, and CVEs inside of our containers, and all this stuff that just didn't even exist 20 years ago.
Yeah, yeah, completely agree. I have a lot of like early in careers, especially where I work, and I'm like, you need to get into networking, and they're like, yeah, but that looks so hard. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I know, but that's where you want to aspire to be, right? And they're like, yeah, but what does it provide? I'm like, it underpins everything. I said
Yeah.
like the first time I spun up a Unix operating system, I had the steepest learning curve, but I was able to understand how computers work more, right? Like how the kernel relates to the hardware layers. And to your point, like, I remember the first couple of networks that I was involved with, and like Cat 5 was out, right, when I was growing up. Don't get me wrong, but Cat 3, I think it was, right, as well. But coaxial, right? Like coaxial networks. And to me, just like a TV aerial, right?
Right.
You had to
Thin
like
net, thick net.
thick net, right? And you had to put stuff on there called terminators, because otherwise you wouldn't get the loop back and
Yep.
everything else. And
Did you have vampire taps? Remember those? That's how
vampire
you would
taps,
connect
right?
to the network.
Exactly that,
Yeah.
right? And those bits and pieces, and that was like way before like the conventional stuff that you see today, right? Most people just see wireless, right? And in the data center you get Cat 6 or fiber, right? Even fiber engineering and that kind of thing. And
Yeah. I mean,
but yeah,
a lot of young people don't realize that 25 years ago, wireless computers was fiction. Like
it
it was
was,
sci-fi.
yeah.
It was sci-fi. Like when Apple came on stage and showed off the first airport, I think is what they called it, they had to like do some trickery to prove to people that it was not fake. There was no hidden wires. This was really working without wires to the internet. And that
Didn't they
that
pick it
blew
up?
our minds.
Didn't they pick it
Yeah.
up? And was it Steve Jobs? I can't remember, but somebody put their hand underneath the laptop, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I think there was someone like that jumped out of like off the screen or something. Yeah, but it was, I mean, those were like the things we have now are such science fiction, but they're like the thing in our pockets. It 30 years ago, I would have, you couldn't have made me believe in my lifetime that would be possible, right? What's funny that we thought we were going to have flying cars, but we didn't think about the fact that we could have a supercomputer in our pocket that would last all day.
Yeah,
Um,
the irony,
we still
right?
don't have flying
Yeah,
cars
exactly.
or hoverboards,
Yeah, I'm
but
still waiting for the hoverboards. I think that's still
yeah,
should do a Kickstarter project for that, right? But it's yeah, we're still not there yet. But yeah, to your point, right? It's I mean, average if you think about it, average across the '90s, right? The late '90s, a lot of people had a personal computer in the home, but the most prominent computer system people had in their homes at that time was a PlayStation, right? If you think
mm,
about it, right?
mhm.
And that was the the compute power that we had. And now, like you said, get your smartphone out and it does everything. It's a camera, it takes phone calls,
Yeah,
messages, email, the works, right? It does everything.
yeah. I think Neil deGrasse said, like, someone asked him about like chips in the body. When are we going to have augmentation and stuff like that? And he's like, we don't need it. We have everything in this thing in our pocket that we can upgrade every 2 years, and it doesn't require surgery. It's easy. It works with all of our uh, our senses. It works well with our vision and our hearing and our touch. And he's like, we're probably never going to, in his lifetime at least, he was like, we're probably not going to ever do that in terms of putting chips in our bodies, just because we thought that was like the future, and that's what all the the Blade Runner style sci-fi all assumes we're going to have. But he's like, this thing is so convenient and easy and cost affordable and low risk. He's like, he doesn't see that anything beyond the smartphone is like, maybe glasses. Maybe we're going to get there with glasses, and obviously we have watches now. But these are all still very external components, and which is sad, because if I was to ever get a tattoo, of which I still have none, I think my first tattoo would be a tattoo of a chip, almost like a wish list. Like, I want a chip on my arm that looks like it's embedded in me, because I've been obsessed with transistors and capacitors since I was a middle schooler. So back when we first got our first breadboards, and um, I had an uncle that managed nuclear power plants, and he was very much an engineer, and I think helped give me a little bit of the spark to get started there. But I mean, to the point of like all this old school tech, like, I still believe today, and I still give advice to a lot of people going through my courses, because 50 to 100 people a day buy my courses and start their sort of their DevOps journey typically, because Docker tends to be one of those now foundational tools that you need to learn when you're learning DevOps. And so it tends to be a lot of people in university, freshers, as some people call them. And I still give them the advice, like, go get the CCNA, go get the basic Cisco
Yeah.
certification, learn the networking, because that will serve you your entire career. I mean, I took that test almost 30 years ago, and I still lean on it today on occasion. And then yeah, build your own PC, like, learn the parts. And how they all relate to each other, and voltage and bus speeds and memory speeds and error correction. Like, you'll learn a lot of really cool stuff on how a computer actually works that will demystify a lot of the current stuff, because we all get these laptops now, and these kids have these laptops and iPads, and it's all in there. It's just completely obscured. They have no idea. And then so build your own PC. And then the third one was like, build your own kernel. Like, learn how, just spend a couple of weeks part time learning how to build a Linux kernel. Pick a distro, figure out how to build it, and get it running on a spare PC you have. You're going to need some USB sticks. You're going to have to learn how things boot from the BIOS. You're going to learn a lot there, and like, those learnings, I feel like, give you the power to realize this stuff isn't magic, and it gives you that core layer of understanding, so that when you're debugging Kubernetes clusters of 100 nodes, your brain might kick in a little thing of like, well, maybe there's a problem with the TCP packet size. Like, maybe maybe if I'm in a data center, I do need to update the NIC driver, which is still pretty rare anymore. But there are things like that still, when you're an operator, if you're managing systems or infrastructure, on occasion you will have to deal with stuff like that, and it's good to have those foundations.
Some real sound advice there. And if I think back, that's learning all those individual pieces was some of the funnest times for me, right? because you're actually building stuff. Believe it or not, you're breaking down the steps and you're going through it all. You know, waiting for that latest Intel or Broadcom driver for the network card. I've been there, right? Literally,
Yeah.
I've been there. So,
Yeah, or rolling back to an old version because the new version has a leak or some sort of problem in it. Yeah,
I,
yeah, those.
yeah. Or I had one where I think I was making my own drivers at one point. Like I was mixing matching INF files with the cat files, right, to get the Wi-Fi card driver to work on Windows Longhorn, right, at the time.
Oh yeah,
And
Longhorn.
Longhorn, right? Like the legend continues. So if anybody wants to know what Longhorn is, I think it was probably one of the most ambitious operating systems Microsoft was ever working on. They were trying to redesign everything. And they had to then it
Didn't go well.
essentially became Vista, right? And we all know what
Yeah,
happened with Vista.
it didn't go well. It was on the level of Windows Me. Um,
Whoa.
yeah, yeah, it was. I mean, the UI was cool. I
Longhorn
remember
was
like
gorgeous. Yeah, at the
I
time.
just remember how they were evolving the UI and it was incredibly incredible looking. This is back when we had CRTs. We didn't have HD.
That's right.
Um, you know, we had our first. I think we had our first flat screen monitors, but they were like 15 inches was the biggest I could afford. And yeah, yeah. But those were ambitious days that like Microsoft doesn't really get too ambitious with OSs anymore. It's not the exciting level. It's not the exciting thing anymore, really. It's like the browser, right? There was a time where browsers were very exciting. I think AI is going to make browsers exciting a little bit again for a period of time, where we maybe chat with our browser. There's a couple of experiments out there that I'm seeing that are maybe going to change a little bit. I mean, AI is going to change everything, but as we'll probably get into it. But I am very much a practical AI guy. You will not hear hype from me. So if I get excited, it's probably because I've actually seen it, I've tested it, and I know it works. But because there is a lot of FUD around AI, and I think we're already starting to see some AI backlashes that I was talking about yesterday. Anyway, we'll get into all that. But
No, no, no. It's a very, very good point. I actually find myself less on the internet these days and just speaking to the prompt or actually speaking to the AI like it's my personal Jarvis in the room. I literally have
I thought
conversations with this thing.
you said less on the internet, and then you went into AI. I thought you were going to say it. You touch grass, and then you're like, nope, I just talked to AI.
Look, well, I do live in a very beautiful part of Canada, and I try to get out as much as possible. Right, I got the mountains and the prairies on my doorstep, but yeah, like I'll speak to Copilot for about half an hour, and like my wife came in, and she was like, "Who have you been speaking to?" It's like he's got a British
Yeah,
accent. Like, who's that? Someone from back home? And I'm like, no, that was
that was a robot.
that was work. All right. And she was like, I said, it's crazy because it responds like a human being, right? And I find myself less now going on the internet and Googling something, right? There's a shift happening, I think, to your point.
Yeah,
So,
I,
but yeah,
I think we have gotten past the uncanny valley of the voice. I think we're like this year is the year that the voice becomes less awkward and more like you have to remind yourself that this is not a human. Yeah.
yeah, I definitely do that because it even says to me, "Yeah, is there anything else you want, mate?" And I'm like, "What? We down the pub? Like, what's going down?" Right? He's like speaking to me like we went to school together, right? So yeah, things are evolving, right? Things are evolving.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so Agentic DevOps. I saw this and I see Agentic SRE as well. That's another one. I think that's sort of
Right.
circulating.
Microsoft
Yeah, I saw that
new
as well. Right,
SRE
I'm
plugin.
still
Yeah.
digging deep on that. Right, seeing what that's about. Because I ultimately said, I said this AI stuff's great, but until it can fix the connectivity issues, right? Then that's when we know it's truly that's a complex. Like to our discussion before, right? It's a complex subject and a complex scenario sometime, right? So agentic DevOps, what do we mean by that, right? What does that? Can you give us an overview? What are your perspective on that?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's basically AI to do DevOps. Um, we'll talk about what agents are in a second. But if you go back for the last 3 years, 2.5 years, ever since ChatGPT came out and sort of the world realized that uh, GPT had grown up and actually become useful, and that we had this idea of chatting with it, which wasn't necessarily a new idea, but it was just obviously they were the first ones to really nail it and get the AI just good enough with the hallucinations and stuff that it was passable for something that could be slightly useful. Fast forward 2.5 years, and we've spent a lot of that time as an industry, especially when I say we, I really mean about infrastructure people, whether it's cloud infrastructure, data infrastructure, anyone who's messing with automation or DevOps or basically my world is after the code commit, after your app code commit, everything else is sort of my wheelhouse. I still spend a lot of time writing code or being involved with code itself, but I don't get paid to write code. I tell people all the time, I'm a pretend programmer. I get paid to orchestrate the code and make it run for users and keep it running. Uh, the whole industry has really been consumed with running the AI. So I call that like DevOps for AI. In other words, like we have to manage GPUs. We have to figure out where to put these inference workloads. That's the term we use for ChatGPT, or running the AI that you're going to talk to. Training the models. If you're in one of those companies that wants to make custom models, I am not one of those. But that's the stuff we've been really consumed with. In fact, if you go to conferences like KubeCon, Cloud Native Con, there's 10,000 people there. And even just this latest one 2 months ago in London, hundreds and hundreds of talks, probably 500 talks over the week. Only one of them even mentions the idea of using AI to do DevOps. So this idea that is quickly coming upon us with the invention of agents and the MCP protocol is a relatively new thing that I was very lucky to have a couple of conversations at the beginning of this year with Solomon Hykes, who was
I know.
the
Yeah, I've had him on the show.
founder of
Yeah.
Docker, now the founder of Dagger, or co-founder. And he reached out and we had a great conversation last year where we kind of talked about, my claim to fame and the way I got known on the internet is like the Docker guy. And he got famous because he invented Docker and became the CEO of a unicorn startup. And we sort of jokingly talked about like, is this the biggest thing we'll ever do? Like, is our future all downhill rather, in terms of our career sort of peak, our ability to make change in the world and help others? Have we done our best work essentially? And so he reached out about in February timeframe and said, we're starting to see something with this agent paradigm that is basically taking AI and giving AI access to tools to make it so that it's not just replying in text, but it can actually go do things on my behalf. And that's the idea of what agents are. It may be one or more LLMs or one or more AIs that you're working with, but we don't really have a hardcore strict definition of agents. But it's the idea is if it's doing stuff for you, if it's actually going to the API and making changes, or if it's accessing the database and pulling back information for you, that is sort of agent mode. And combine that with Anthropic came out with a standard last year called MCP, Model Context Protocol. It's a pretty simple, I'm going to call it a standard because we don't really have anything else right now that's taking over. But this idea of, we can take the models, we can train them to understand what a tool is or how to call out to a tool, whether that's a curl command or something else in the shell or a remote database or an internet API. It understands all these things as tools, and we need a common protocol for the models themselves to know how to talk to these things, and then to define each one of our tools in a way that an LLM can understand, which pretty much means writing a prompt for each one of your tools. If it was curl, you'd have to define it as, here are the words you would use to type into the shell. This is how you access a shell. And this is what curl does. And you actually write it out in human language. So there's really not code necessarily to make these. Most of this is just human language. You're prompting it with all this information. And then hopefully when you do that, you have now a common protocol that every LLM that can speak to tools or speak MCP, we call it MCP client, can then talk to anything in the world that has an MCP server. And all of a sudden, in 3, 4 months, we have now lit up the internet with everything having an MCP server and every LLM being an MCP client. So Docker Desktop has this built in now as of the last 30 days. Everything from GitHub to clouds. I think just yesterday, AWS announced their EKS MCP server. So very quick and short timelines. Just about every tool we're all using for infrastructure is being lit up as a MCP server endpoint, which means if we connect it through various methods to our chat, whether that's ChatGPT or your own local one that you're running in Llama or Docker, or maybe you're using Anthropic, or you're using maybe a Cursor IDE or VS Code with Copilot. Like there's all these different things. But if you have that LLM access, you can then give it connections to all these tools that you want, and it can go do all the things, presumably that you give it, like the API keys and the things it needs to access stuff. And that concept, we didn't even know that was as an industry a year ago. I didn't know what that thing was 3, 4 months ago. And so when Solomon reached out and kind of was cluing me in to what they were doing at Dagger, and that they were having, and if you don't know Dagger, it's a startup that's focusing on CI as code, and they're basically taking the Docker idea further to let's automate CI by using containers as ways to run our automations anywhere. And we're going to give you a bunch of composable little parts called Dagger modules. And so one module might be accessing your Notion notes. Another one might be accessing AWS's Lambda API. And you bring all these things together, and you can basically write your CI workflows in your language of choice in a very short file, usually 100 lines of code, if that. And so it makes it really easy to automate your CI that you can run anywhere, and it wouldn't be CI specific. Well, they started to see some of their users throwing LLMs into the mix as one of these modules, so that they could have access to all their things and then pass some of that information to an LLM and say, hey, summarize this GitHub issue, or summarize this code change, or go and do some analysis and return some results on what you think this thing is. And Dagger started to see that, and he reached out and was like, you might want to start paying attention. This might be a moment. This might be our next big thing. And so we both have, he's got his startup, I've got my content, and I'm at this point purely an educator and teacher. So my job is like, how do I distill this stuff down to the average person who's just trying to get their job done? They might be a developer, they might be a full-time DevOps engineer, they might be a build engineer or a platform builder or a cloud infrastructure manager. All these people are my people. And so now my job is like to see this coming, to try to read the tea leaves, and to help people understand that this is going to happen in very different ways. Like we're going to have top-down management telling us we've got to use AI to build our infrastructure. That's going to happen, right? Because we already have management saying, you hear news about companies deciding, well, we're not going to hire any new engineers until we decide whether AI can do that job or not. I am not in the camp of AI is going to replace people in mass. Everything we've seen so far does not tell me that that's going to happen anytime soon. And I actually think a lot of these layoffs that we've been seeing in the industry aren't AI directly related. Like we're not literally replacing people with AI yet. All the studies you see show that even for engineers that are just writing code, you're really only getting 10 to 20%, maybe sometimes 30% performance improvement in your job by using AI full time for coding and whatnot. So it's not like we're seeing 10x engineers coming out of this. That's all fantasy and wishful thinking. So long story longer here is, if you see the progress of the industry and business, because we're all usually doing this as a job for a company, they're on a track where they believe AI is going to make software engineers more productive, and they're going to need less of them, and they're going to be able to do more stuff. Well, that's not necessarily always true, and it certainly isn't true to the case that the internet has hype around. But that's also going to be coming for ops. Like we're naive to think that we can sit around as operators and say something like, which by the way, this has been what I've been saying is I can't use AI in my job. There's no use for AI in my job. The best thing it could possibly do is write me some YAML that I'm going to have to probably correct. And that's, it's going to write me some Kubernetes YAML or some Terraform. And at best, it's going to help me code complete my functions or my line of HCL or YAML or something, right? That's the most we've all been willing to let AI into our jobs as operators because it's not deterministic. It can't produce the same result 10 times or even 2 times in a row. How could it possibly manage infrastructure or help me troubleshoot or deploy applications reliably or build platforms? It can't possibly do that. Well, the problem is now is we've convinced the whole world that AI is coming for all the jobs, which means management is going to eventually come to the operators and say, "Hey, I know you've had your head in the sand and you say this AI stuff isn't going to work for you, but you're going to need to figure out a way to use it, or we're going to find someone else." Like, I think that day is going to eventually come if it's not already here. And I've got a bunch of anecdotal stories of where I'm seeing this happen in the industry. Analysts are saying this, and like companies are expecting this. And so when you start to read the tea leaves a little bit, you realize that as bad as AI can be right now, as much as it can hallucinate and give us bad code and horrible PRs, we actually need to start practicing the art of how do we wrangle these crazy texting robots into a format that we can maybe give it work and it can produce an acceptable result. Because like the models are going to get better. That's going to take years. But for now, we need to figure out some patterns that we can start to try out and repeat to see if we can't come up with workflows where I'm just going to imagine I can give the AI prompt, or I can write a markdown document of exactly how I want my EKS cluster to be built in AWS. And I give it all my requirements. I need this many nodes. I want to run this version. I need to have these security groups, make sure that you've tested and linted and done all these things. And don't come back to me until you've actually deployed it and all of these checks work. You can you can hit this thing, you can deploy this thing. Like, you give it a whole bunch of requirements of your end design goals. And if you just threw that in a prompt today with ChatGPT, it would hallucinate like crazy. It would go nuts. It would be useless, essentially. But we're realizing with this agentic model that we can take these little things and turn them into little bitty pieces of work. Each one of these little things on its own, if you give an AI very little amount of scope and very little amount, like one tool, like Terraform, and you say, I need this, just do this one little thing that's maybe 20 lines. It can maybe get it right 70% of the time, 80% of the time, if you're lucky. If you're paying for a good model, that is, with an LLM. And we can start creating patterns where we are building out a set of AI robots, essentially, that are just sitting there taking this work, dividing it up. You have something like a governor AI that manages all the other AIs, splits the work up appropriately. You can end up with AIs that actually check the other one's work to validate it, to write the tests to make sure that things pass. This all sounds really complicated now, but from a mindset, if you're an engineer, it's not much different than what we're doing today. We all plan out our architecture. We operate it one step at a time. We build things one step at a time until we eventually end up with the complete system we need. So the industry is very quickly huddling around the idea that if we break all this up and we well define it, we might just be able to give the AI work, let it cook for a day, burn $500 worth of AWS credits, and it might have actually deployed and attempted to recreate an environment 15 times, and then you have something, but you didn't do much other than just define the requirements, which we already have to do in a really mature shop. You're already defining those requirements anyway. You have standards. They're probably in Confluence or something else. We just don't know how to make the AI do that work reliably. And that's what I think the AI agentic patterns and what I'm calling agentic DevOps, that's what we're going to end up with. So I'm kind of predicting ahead a couple of years because a lot of things got to come together. We got to have reliable MCPs that don't leak security tools like GitHub just announced. There was a big vulnerability with MCP where you could basically convince the LLM to access someone else's private information on GitHub. That came out this week. So we've got to tighten up the security. We got to figure out how to authorize and authenticate AIs in a safe way. We got to make sure that there's checks and balances and that humans have the final approval, because you can't fire an AI. It's like you've got to have a human involved and responsible for what the AI is doing. But these are all just standards. This is like us recreating the idea of DevOps or recreating Agile, right? This is just something that's going to be a new paradigm shift, a new way of thinking about systems and system design. But I do think that whether it's this year or 3 years from now, we're going to be, those of us in the leading edge are going to be using these tools to create infrastructure, to manage infrastructure, to help troubleshoot infrastructure. And it will sometimes get things wrong, but humans get things wrong too. So we've just got to figure out the workflows and the patterns. And I think the tools we have now, between the MCP tooling and protocol and the way that we're wrapping all of our tools that we already have with this MCP thing so that LMs can talk to them, I think we're going to end up in a way where this is usable and you can be productive. And we're already starting to see signs of that today. It's still extremely early days. Like, we're talking super tip of the spear stuff right now, where it's super leading edge. But part of my job in being a trainer and an educator and a podcaster is like trying to help people see where we're going and help to get them there faster.
I couldn't agree more, right? As soon as a new piece of tech out, regardless, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna try that, right? Because
Yeah.
it's in my nature. But I remember asking ChatGPT to do some Terraform about 2 years ago, and it was garbage,
Right.
right?
And you
You
walked
ask
away
it
probably. You're like,
now,
nope, not for me.
yeah, no. Well, I just thought it's got to learn, right? That's it, right? So 20 million other people probably must have done the same thing, and guess what? You ask it to do something now, and it's 90% there, and I'm
Yeah.
just like,
Especially if it's small. Like, if you
yeah,
can give it
like
a small,
don't give it
something very
monolithic,
specific.
wide
Yeah.
range. But to your point, it's and I also see that as like a platform engineering concept as well. Like, as a developer, I need a database, right? I don't care what the database is; it just has to meet these requirements. Now, if you could combine that with agentic DevOps, right? There's that. To your point, we've got these tools. They're my standards as well. So you could pretty much like modularize the footprint of your software factory, right? If we want to call it that, and just have these MCPs, and you say, do you know what? I need a web app with a database, and it needs high availability, and it needs to be able to meet demand of Black Friday. And here's some historical data. Off you go.
Right. Yeah, and,
You
and
know what I'm
those
saying?
those tools exist today. We actually have some tools out there. The problem right now is that these are all product companies taking AI, taking basically customizing LLMs, whether using RAG or some other type of feeding a bunch of prompts and system prompts and information into the LLM along with your particular requirements. Maybe it's a diagram, maybe it's Markdown, maybe it's a Confluence page, maybe it's a GitHub issue, and feeding it into the system, and then the system being the LLM or more than one LLM, because you can sort of design different personas where you have one that's writing it, one that's checking it to make sure it meets requirements. And because LLMs are very eager, at least the way that we are currently designing them. So one thing that was pointed out to me this year was like, they never really say no. They never say they can't do something. Well, unless there's a system prompt that prevents you from doing that, like build a bomb. But they don't. They want to help you, so they will often hallucinate when they just don't, like, when they don't know how to do something. They will. That's when they are most
For
likely to
sure.
hallucinate.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So the challenge is, like, you probably, the whole discussion around can they invent new things. I'm not an expert enough to know if they ever will, but the fact is, like, most of us, especially if we're using open source tooling, like the patterns and practices we're building stuff with, they've all been done before, right? Like, everything done in a Docker file has been done before. Everything everything in a Kubernetes YAML has been done before. So hopefully they've been trained on all that open source data, and they're able to just repeat patterns. Of course, if you played with them enough, you know that it will also repeat the bugs and the vulnerabilities and all the other issues. And we've got a general problem with the LLMs being at least a year or two out of date usually. So if you're trying to run like the latest versions of everything, that's always a challenge with it. I think these are all solvable problems, but what I love right now is, particularly with companies like uh, Dagger, is that they're not just trying to build a proprietary product that they're going to sell people, because I don't think that that's the future of agentic DevOps. I think that just like developers have their favorite front end, if you're a front end developer, you have your favorite frameworks, right? You might even have your favorite hosting, but you you don't like go job to job and say, well, this is the only SaaS that I can operate on because it's the only one I've ever used, and the whole company has to change because of me. Like, if we think far enough out, if we realize that we're gonna have like our own little AI buddies that come with us as engineers, and we go from company to company, job to job, and we all kind of bring our own, I have like my all my own Terraform stuff and uh what am I saying? Like little clips of text and snippets. And I have my own Docker files that I reference. And so a lot of times when you're building platforms and building systems, you're just kind of copy and pasting from a lot of the other stuff you've used, or the stuff that your company has as a standard. And this is our sample repo for how we do Terraform. And, or this is our Kubernetes. This is the way we do Kubernetes manifests. And this is our templating system. This is how we use templating. Like, you end up with a lot of that stuff already. That all kind of needs to be open source and generic. And so a lot of what's happening right now in the industry with all these startups popping up, trying to solve these problems, I think those are going to be around. But I think what's more important for us is to find the open source, to find the patterns that we can do all this stuff without any of those particular tools. Those tools might make it easier for us, but we're going to need to know the systems for how do I give that LLM access to my monitoring and logging and observability so that it can help shorten my outage times by possibly doing some, we have an issue, we have an alert, and the pager duty pages me, but then it also pages the LLM to wake up and see the error message and go ping or go poke around in some of the systems to figure out if it can't give me advice on how to solve that problem quicker, or possibly even give me the solution and give me like a one button sort of, would you like me to modify this to see if I can't fix it? So we're going to get there. It's just a question of, what is this all going to look like once we're there? Like, what kind of tools and patterns and practices will I have as a DevOps engineer in order to be AI assisted in my job? And I will go to my next job with my AI assistants coming with me. And I will come in and say, like, I've got AI that can help me build clouds, and maybe maybe by then we have a custom LLM just written for cloud native that knows all the latest cloud native stuff, all the latest documentation and API endpoints, swaggers, and it's been completely updated, and it's actually pretty small, so we can run it locally on our systems or in CI because it's been trained specifically for that job. And maybe that's what we all come up with as an idea for how we're going to, take an AI buddy and send it to a problem or send it to a Jira ticket, and it's actually going to do some work for us and present us with a possible solution.
No, I really agree with all those points. You know, imagine like taking your own R2D2 with you everywhere you go, right? From job to
Mm-hmm.
job, right? That's the that's the analogy I'm
It
going
would
to
be
use
much
anyway.
cooler if it was
It,
physical
it would
hardware.
be
I
really
agree.
cool.
It would
I,
agree. I would
I
agree.
I'm still waiting for them to build kit out of Knight Rider. Like, I'll buy that car straight away, right?
Right.
But no, I completely agree. Like, we're big fans of Dagger, right? Here at Code to Cloud, anyway, especially with our engineering team. And we just see it as a workbench, right? With all these
Yeah.
LLMs to help us build out whatever it is we're going to be doing, right? Like, and again, if we look at software over the past 30, 30 years at least, the most prominent ones have been the ones that are still here today are ones that are either built on open source or related to open source, right? If I think of like some of the big names like Apple, Microsoft, yeah, their operating systems are here and that kind of thing. But how many Linux projects are still here? There's thousands of them, right? Pieces of technology that are used every day. And, with the CNCF as well, stuff that gets put into the incubator projects there and is fully promoted there, it becomes persistent and it becomes neutral territory. And to your point, we're able to break it down, right? So they'll flourish because basically the community becomes the custodians of it, right? Of how it's going to be built
Yeah.
out. So
And once someone figures out, once one team figures out a repeatable workflow of how to use AI to build a platform, and that is like, and once it's documented as something that is repeatable, reliable, um, uses nothing but open source, so it can be run on any LLM, or maybe it has a specific LLM that is open source. You can download it from Hugging Face and Docker Hub now. Once those things exist, I mean, that may be this year, that may not be this year, but once that exists, like suddenly it's going to be like, the next essential tool in everybody's toolkit. We all, if you're someone who operates any level of infrastructure, you've played with Ansible, you've played with Terraform, you've built a Docker file. Like these are all fundamentals. They're all open source. Um, and it's hard to imagine being an operator or a builder without these tools. There will be a day that we have something AI related that is also a part of that toolkit. It's just a question now of like, what is it going to look like? Who's going to win? Like, who's going to have the framework that kind of brings all this together uh, in a way that's safe, hopefully as secure as we can make it, and reduces, helps us reduce hallucinations and reduce sort of the slop that we see a lot of the AIs doing right today. And if you'd asked me 6 months ago of what we were, a status as an industry, I would have said it's all slop. 10% of the code is good that it makes, and I don't see any future in it. But suddenly we pivoted and we realized, oh, there's this agentic model where it's much more useful than just typing code or, printing out text essentially. And like, I didn't see that coming, right? I'm not at the forefront of regular AI foundational models. I'm not working at Anthropic, OpenAI, or Microsoft or whatever, or Google. So I didn't see that coming. And like, all we need is one or two other pivots like that we didn't see coming. And then suddenly this is here, and we will, and then a year later, we're all going to go, well, of course, duh. Like hindsight's 2020. We're all going to look back and say, oh yeah, that if you just saw it happening, it was going to happen. And I have never like I was very lucky in that I got my start with Docker in the first year of it. I actually hated it, did not understand it, couldn't figure out how to make it work right because I thought I was building an entire OS in a container.
that's
So I kept
right.
trying to shove everything in the container. Obviously, I was doing that wrong. And it wasn't until late 2014 that I actually tried it the second time. It made sense. And just because I've been around forever, like having a 30-year career, I've seen mainframe to PC, PC to VMs, VMs to cloud, cloud to container. Like I've seen each one of these major infrastructure shifts. And so I was able to call out like Docker was going to be the next one. And I correctly identified that really early on, changed my whole career, pivoted to exclusively working on container stuff. And that was the right call for me. Like it turned out to be as big as I thought it was going to be. And we're now 10 years into that, 12 years into that wave, and it's still happening. And I think that if I could predict the next one and be 2 for 2, like I think this is it. Like this will be the next wave of infrastructure where we have an AI assistant. I call them AI buddies because that sounds funner. Um, and they're going to be a part of our workflow, and we're going to have to learn how to argue with a crazy texting robot until we get things right. so I don't always enjoy it. I'm not saying it's always great, and it can be very frustrating at times, and there are definitely days where I'm thinking this would have been faster had I just done it myself. But I think we'll get there, and it's just, play with it today. That's my advice. Like, play with whatever today. Check out Dagger. I mean, it's not the only thing out there, but they are one of the few that's, there's something K8's GPT you might want to check out if you're someone who's interested in Kubernetes. And try to look at MCP. I look at some of my Docker videos for MCP. I've got some more coming out on how you can now in Docker Desktop, as of like 3 weeks ago, you can now install Docker Desktop. If you have an NVIDIA GPU or a Mac with an Apple Silicon processor, you can run an open source LLM locally, or just use one of the foundational models on the internet like ChatGPT. You use one of those or run it locally if you have the GPU. Then you have something inside it that is called Gordon, which is their own LLM, or you can use one of these that you can run yourself. Then you can put a chat interface on top of it called Open Web UI, which is a free open source clone that's very feature comparative to ChatGPT. It has memory. It saves your chats. It's pretty cool. You can choose which model you want to use if you've got a bunch downloaded into Docker. So I've got like half a dozen open source Docker models sitting in my machine on my Mac. Obviously, they're not as fast and as awesome as any of the foundational ones in the cloud, but they are there, and they're, I don't know, 50% as good. um, and then I can enable, with ClickBoxes, I can enable MCP tools for things like Chrome or AWS or Notion or GitHub or any other. There's like 400 tools now in the MCP catalog on
That's
Docker
right.
Hub. And then
Terraform's
I
on
can
there,
connect
right?
those. Yeah, so I can connect those to, I can use Cursor or Windsurf or VS Code Copilot. Those are all my MCP clients that are running the LLMs. I can use the tools from the MCP toolkit and run those individually in Docker containers. And Docker Desktop will actually run those behind an MCP toolkit, basically a proxy that will only spin them up when I use them. So they're dynamically loaded and unloaded. Same with the LLMs, it dynamically loads and unloads it when I'm not using it. And I can basically play locally in chat by giving it a bunch of different tools, giving it my API keys, and I don't need anything on the internet. I don't need to pay for anything. I can just do all that in Docker Desktop. And so that's today, right? I can set this up on my machine in about 20 minutes, and I even have a gist that you can just do a Docker Compose one-liner to spin all this up, and then before you know it, you're able to chat with a local LLM that can access your GitHub and give you information out of your PRs and do all sorts of stuff just by chatting with a robot. And it's not gonna be all wonderful. It's not gonna solve all your problems. I tried to ask it to pull. I said the other day, I said, pull every repo from. I have 100 repos in GitHub. Pull all 100 repos. Find all open PRs. Summarize them and give me them in a table. And it was doing the work, but it was taking a while, and then eventually I hit like API call limits on GitHub. So like, in other words, I was asking the robot to do way too much stuff, and it was going and doing
Rate limiting, right?
recursive API calls on every repo, and then into every issues list, and into everything that's open, and it was a lot. So I basically asked it to do too much work, and then I got rate limited. But these things exist today and have only for a couple of months. They're brand new tech, but you can have an afternoon and get pretty far with just playing around with this stuff and seeing maybe that'll like put the light bulb on for some people, and they'll realize, oh wow, these tools, like, they work. They may not be reliable or safe in terms of production yet, but that's coming, right? We that will come. There's too many billions on the line for this to not happen. There's like everything, all the incentives are aligned for this to be the focus for IT. Is, we've got all the billions coming from the big companies. We've got all the little startups trying to solve these problems and sell products. We've got open source trying to work on this because they're excited about it. And then we've got business management telling us we have to start using AI so we can go faster to compete, and we're going to reduce workforce if they want to. And so all those incentives are lined up around the money pit to drive us towards this AI future, whether we like it or not. So might as well be a part of it and have some fun along the way. It's my take.
That's awesome. And I really appreciate those insights, Brett. I agree. I feel like it's going to go that way as well, right? It is. It is, right?
Yeah.
It's like those pivotal moments in tech, right? The iPhone, right? The internet, whatever you want to
Yeah.
call it, right? It's going to pick those up. So, yeah, I mean, I'm just conscious of time. I feel like we've had an amazing
Yep.
conversation here, but I just want to
Yep.
finish it off with the quick fire round, right? As a bit of
Do it.
perspective. So, what's your favorite operating system of all time?
Well, there's nostalgia and then there's reality of
Let's
today.
go for
Like today,
nostalgia. Let's go for that first.
nostalgia. Today, I'm a Mac OS person, but nostalgia. I had I had a very strong fondness for FreeBSD between the years of like 99 and maybe like 2006. I even bought their swag from their swag store. Like
Was that
I
the Red
ran my
Devil?
own.
Was that the
Yes,
like
it's a
like a
little demon.
sphere?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, demon. That was it.
yeah, it's a
Not a devil.
yeah, it's a
Sorry.
little cute demon. Got horns. He's red. I'm assuming it's a he. It. Um, and FreeBSD it did not win. Like Linux won the Unix variant wars, but FreeBSD was one of, if not the first open source operating system that included a built-in package manager. On Linux, that didn't really happen until Gentoo, if my memory serves correctly. So in just like 2002, I was building an open source ISP for my neighborhood because we didn't have high speed broadband. So I bought a T1 line, which was $600 a month for 1.5 megabits. This was bleeding edge tech in
It
2002.
was. It was the stuff
Um,
of legends at school. I remember people
yeah,
talking about this.
and I basically got like 30 of my neighbors to go in, and we built a little Wi-Fi network. It wasn't truly mesh because we didn't have mesh back then. We built a little ad hoc Wi-Fi network, and I charged them, I don't know, 30, $50 a month, and paid for this T1 for us to all have faster internet than dial-up. And I did the entire thing on FreeBSD. I had probably 6 computers sitting on a stack. I loved Solaris. I had some Solaris as well.
Wow.
Um, but FreeBSD has a special place in my heart. I still have a blog post on my old blog, fishbrains.com, very old personal site that I've frozen in time from 20 years ago. But it's a 30-year-old blog post of how I used SD's dummy net protocol or library in 2002 to rate limit or bandwidth limit all my neighbors based on the price that they paid me. So they would come through Wi-Fi. This was a PC with 2 NICs in it that would act as a router, and it would limit their speed based on how much they paid me. And then I also, that same system would also have their email. It had a whole bunch of normal ISP services back then. Got our email addresses back then from our ISPs. And I just had so much fun with it. Late nights, constantly rebuilding it. I was building the kernel on it because that's back then you kind of had to do that. And, like you said, Wi-Fi drivers were a thing. Like I had to, and so like you really felt like you were building something creative back then. I guess today it would be like the equivalent would be almost like 3D printers. Like back then we were, you were putting together a PC and you were building everything from scratch, and the operating system was from scratch. And then you went and found open source. GitHub didn't exist. Google barely existed. We did not have YouTube. We didn't have Facebook. It was barely a thing. So yeah, it was a pretty awesome time, and I have a lot of nostalgia for that. And that is not a quick answer. So
Absolutely loved it. No, and do you know what? It's not supposed to be a quick answer either. We found out that Bret there pioneered and deployed his own neighborhood ISP.
yeah,
I think
FWIP,
that
phwip.net, Potomac Hunt Wireless Internet Project. It was the name of the neighborhood. So yeah,
that's awesome.
that
So
that might somewhere be on the internet still. I don't know, somewhere in the Internet Archives.
we'll try and check that out. But then you said, right, you're a Mac OS, right? Is that what you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pure Apple today, and that not as I mean, I got Linux in my closet. I actually have a Windows server in my closet. I have Hyper-V in my closet. Like I have all the things, but to be productive, so that I'm not tinkering with things all day long, and because I run my own little company with my wife, and I don't have time to tinker with my thing that I need to be reliable and safe and secure every day. So 15 years ago, I chose Mac, left Windows for Mac, and never looked back. So yeah.
I did that last year. Yeah. Uh, I'm not going back.
Yeah.
Do you know what? You get to an age and you're like, to your point, I'll just start stripping the OS back, right? Or trying to change something, or I'm like, I need it to be like my phone, right? Kind of thing. I've got that ecosystem going on, so okay.
Yeah. There's so many other levels higher in the stack that I play with that I just needed the core OS layer and the hardware layer and everything to just be as stable and as safe as possible, so that I could play in containers and play with the
Oh, for
cloud,
sure.
right? So yeah.
So where can folks find you, Bret? Where's the easiest place to try and find you?
.com. That's Bret with one T, Fisher with no C, so BRETFISHER.com. If you just search my name, hopefully the internet does a good job of finding me. I'm pretty much everywhere. We are live every Thursday on YouTube, streaming everything DevOps and containers and cloud native. And you can find my podcasts, DevOps and Docker Talk, and then the new one, Agentic DevOps, on any podcast player, or not maybe any, but the top 20 podcast
I know what
players.
you mean, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I have courses on Udemy. If you are someone who likes to buy cheap Udemy courses, I have some bestsellers there that have about 350,000 students. And I've got some new stuff coming out, some new courses this year, one on GitHub Actions for DevOps, one on Argo CD for GitOps, and then maybe this year, next year, maybe a course on like AI for DevOps or agentic DevOps.
Sounds awesome. So thanks again for coming onto the show. Thanks for our
Yeah.
listeners. And
Thanks, Kevin.
yeah, it's been a ride. I've absolutely loved every moment of it. But yeah, thank you very much. And we'll
I'm
catch you on
glad.
the next one.
Yeah, I'll see you soon. Thanks for having me here.
See you all later.